Um, Great, awesome. Uh, Welcome back. Hopefully you guys had a good weekend. So let's get into it. Um, as usual, I'll go over logistics real quick, and then the speaker session, and then followed by plenty of time for Q&A today. Um, Again, camera on if possible, and then make sure you're on mute. We sent out the group evaluation form I think last night or this morning, and just make sure you fill it out by this Sunday, because it's part of your grades. And also, we're having a mini demo day on November, and with a couple of judges from Skydeck and SCET program to give you guys some feedbacks and advice on your projects. So what you need to do eventually is to present your idea to them, and we will send out instructions in the coming weeks. So just keep that in mind as you do your project assignments. Again, weekly assignments are due this Sunday, and this week we're actually having, asking you to use the access code to access the homework assignments. It's just a way for us to encourage people to actually show up in class instead of watching the recording. I'll tell you guys what the code is after the end of my part, and otherwise you just have to wait till the weekend to get the code from the lecture recording. And other than that, just email us if you have any questions. Awesome. Let me get into it. So today's topic is the art of scale or growth. So again, today we're here between the stage 2 and 3. Just as a side note, please make sure you actually reach product market fit before you start scaling, because if not, you will just end up scaling the wrong product for the wrong people. So here's a quick exercise today. You guys can just type in the questions, your guesses in the chat for fun, I guess. So on the x-axis is the year, and the y-axis is the amount of users that Facebook had, and the solid line is their actual growth, and the dotted line is the predicted growth from their data scientists within Facebook. And here are 3 instances where the actual growth beat the projection. Do you guys have any guesses for the first instances? You guys can just type it in the chat. Okay, I see a couple. Yeah, but not exactly. So the first thing they did was translation. So they already had a decent amount of users in the US and some other major English-speaking countries, and to expand the user base, what they did was to translate the product into different languages, so that more people can have access to it. Any guesses for the second thing they did during around 2010 and 2011? Messenger? Yeah, I guess related. Anything else? Yeah, WhatsApp. Well, so the second thing was mobile, and at the time, the phones that we're using today are getting more like a lot more powerful, and new apps are coming out every single day almost. And Facebook basically shifted their focus from desktop to mobile. Any guesses for the third one? Instagram? Not really, but good guess. Okay, so the third one is so if you think about it, over 1 billion users is actually a lot of people. And what they did at the time was that they worked with different carriers to get more people the access to internet. And then after that, they helped them open up new Facebook accounts. So that's a kind of a sneaky way of getting more users, I guess. So moving on. So depending on your business, you will have different ways to scale your product. And let's say if your product is about real estate, where people only do it for 2 or 3 times their entire life, you and whenever they do it, they look it up on Google, right? And so your best bet would be optimizing for search, because you want to be the first thing people see when they look up stuff. And referral program is always helpful. An extreme case would be PayPal. They started off by offering people $20 if they open up an account, and another 20 if they actually referred one of their friends. And then they drop it to 10, then 5, and at the end they burned about $70 billion. So that was an extreme case for referral. And about virality, if network effect improves user experience for your product, then getting more users using your product should probably be your priority. LinkedIn and Facebook will not be popular if there are only 10 people on it, and Tinder would not survive in the Bay Area if all the users are in Florida. And another case is that if you already know who your next customer is going to be, you should probably just start making sales calls with them. Let's say aerospace. There's probably not it's not gonna work if you start selling Berkeley students airplane and stuff. So instead, you should just call Boeing or Airbus or any other big companies to sell your product. Let's see. Okay. So you guys have probably seen virtually applies to any product.
Thomas, I think your mic is cut off. We can't hear you anymore. Still can't hear you.
Let's see.
Oh, okay, I can hear you now.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay, awesome. So again, I think this graph applies to basically virtually every single product. And for Yelp and Wikipedia, their acquisition loop looks like this. People find stuff, and a percentage of them actually create content for other people, and then Google picked it up, and more people search for it, and then move forward that way. And then another acquisition loop for paid marketing. The steps goes like new people saw ads, and then they clicked on it, and a percentage of them sign up, and another percentage of them within that actually pay for the product. And with the revenue, you then can buy more ads. So with the same loop, you can break it down into more detail. And the idea is that once you break down the loop, you can make different growth decisions based on the data. So here's just a more detailed version of the previous loop. There are a lot of things that you can do once you break down the loop, and there are a lot of things are designed with intentions. Here are 2 examples for Snack Pass. Whenever your friend buys something, they will be able to send a gift to you, and whenever your friend does that, this will pop out. And it's basically an ad from SnackPass, but it's triggered by your friend. So you feel more comfortable about it, and now you're thinking about buying boba on SnackPass. And for Airbnb, it's basically the same idea. The referral program is basically yelling at you that your friend is already using Airbnb, and you get free money for signing up. Why don't you use it already? And they managed to do it in a way that makes you feel special. So here's a quote from the new documentary on Netflix called, I think, Social Dilemma. It's a bit dark, but I think it's very interesting. So moving forward, I want to introduce another scale strategy that goes against pretty much what I just said. So startups have limited capitals, right? And you definitely want to turn that into revenue and make profits. The idea of Blitzscaling is to get as much user as possible within the shortest amount of time. So imagine if you're the front runner of a new market with low barrier of entry, and your competitors have not entered the market yet, but can do so quickly. What's the most urgent thing to do? It's probably not making a bunch conservative projections. Instead, you should just act quickly and grow into market dominance as soon as possible. But if you're doing it this way, you need to have a killer product, a robust distribution channel, and a market with sufficient demand. So take Uber as an example. It's been known as a company that burns a lot of cash and rarely turns profits. As you can see in the second quarter in 2018 alone, they lost about $1 billion. And why are the investors not worried at the time? Even though they're burning a lot of money, they're actually getting a lot more users. And in their case, having a lot more users usually keeps the investors happy. So I talked a lot about products, but just keep in mind that people, or as CEO or as founders, you need to scale up as well. In Ben Horowitz' book, he mentioned that managing people is a skill that learned through experience, and you should give other team members and yourself the opportunity to make mistakes and learn from them. But you also need to realize that the people that is good at managing a team of 10 might not be able to handle the company as it scale up to 100. This is the end of my part, and the code for this week's homework assignment is viral loop, all lower cases with a space in the middle. And without further ado, let me introduce today's speaker, Chef Wang, who is the partner at IOVC and also the general manager at Rescale.
Thanks, Thomas.
Yep.
All right. Can everyone hear my slides? Awesome. Thanks for inviting me, and thank you everyone for being here. A little bit about myself. I'm also a Cal alum. I'm a venture capital investment manager, and currently I'm the general manager for Rescale in China and Southeast Asia. So before becoming an investor, I actually co-founded a food delivery startup in Hong Kong and grew it to the largest in the region. So I had some hands-on experience with growth in the consumer space. So the company that I'm working with today is called Rescale. It's currently a Series C B2B startup with investors like Jeff Bezos, Peter Thiel, Paul Graham, Microsoft. So it's doing really well in the B2B space. And my role in Rescale was to grow its business in certain geography. In my investor role, I've invested in both to business and to consumer startup that eventually become unicorns. So in this lecture, I'll cover growth strategy for both consumer and enterprise startups. And by the way, feel free to raise your hands in the chat whenever you have any questions. So a big reason I think why any one of us is interested in the startup world is because of its hyper growth, right? We all imagine the story of a geek designing an app and got to 100 million user, get to IPO, and live on beach house forever. So that's kind of the dream. And like hyper growth is like the trademark of Silicon Valley. But what exactly make this hyper growth possible? Am I set to success when I have a good product? Am I set to success when like I'm adopting a certain business model, for example, a social network or a two-sided marketplace? Am I set to success if I have a lot of users? And as an investor, I've seen counterexample for all of this scenario. We see a great product, but nobody wants. We see social network companies and marketplace companies failed to expand beyond its initial seed users. And we've seen companies like Netflix, which is neither a social network nor a marketplace, but Netflix is pretty much the benchmark in the industry for successful growth, right? And we've seen companies that raised a lot of money from first tier VC and got a lot of user early on and then crashed very fast. So in this lecture, we'll talk about like why is that and how you can avoid it in your journey as a startup founder. So growth or scaling or blitzscaling, whatever you want to call it, is actually not a well-defined concept. So before we talk about how to do growth, we should quickly go through what is growth. Like 10 years ago, growth is not a thing. There were a bunch of founders who put together the idea and starting to call it growth, formalize the workflow of how to grow a company systematically and scientifically. And at that time, it's very much driven by those individual experts. And that's why they're referred to as growth hacker. And that's why you still hear the term growth hacker or growth hacking. But that's growth 1.0. Right now, we are 10 years later. And if you look at startups that are successful and big companies like Uber or Facebook or Netflix, growth is a team effort. And it's very much a formalized function unit within the organization. And in this lecture, we'll talk about what would it look like, and if you were to be part of that team, what your role will be. So the next thing is, a lot of people confuse growth with marketing, and for good reason, because they are both about promoting something. But the process and the end result is very different. Growth is more about taking feedback from the audience and try to tune your product to be more popular. So it actually emphasizes more on the product side. If you think about it, marketing is very much one way. You had a product and you want to put it in front of your audience. But growth is a loop. You have a product in the market and you collect your user behavior data. You make a hypothesis on how can you social engineering your user to change their behavior. For example, to share your product more or to refer it to their friends or make more purchase or be more active. Whatever it is, you make a hypothesis on how you can change your product to alter their behavior. And then you execute it on those hypotheses and see how it works in real life, get those data and then analyze them again. And you do it over and over again on your product. And that's actually how your product stays competitive in the market. So there's a lot that we can talk about in growth. We can talk about product growth. We can talk about growth marketing. We can talk about growth as a person. There's really isn't a set boundary on this topic. And I don't want to overwhelm you with a lot of information. So for sake of this duration of this lecture, we will talk about two things. We'll talk about the methodology of growth, how you would actually apply it in your journey. I will talk about the basic principles, and we can together examine how these principles are applied in real life scenarios. And secondly, as mentioned, growth is not a hack. When you are a founder, you need to structure a team of growth experts and see how they function and interact with the rest of the organization. And I think for many of you who are not planning on becoming a founder anytime soon, but still interested in the hyper-growth nature of the startup and wants to be part of it, I will touch upon what kind of roles there is in the organization and what kind of impact will we be making within the growth team. Did someone have a question? Oh, sorry. All right. So without further ado, we're gonna talk about the growth strategies. And just very broadly speaking, you can split it into two parts. One where you get user for free, and one where you get user with money. And for most people, when you hear about growth stories in the media, where someone out of nowhere started something that got to 100 million user with no media budget, those are the stories that you hear, and those are the free growth that we usually talk about. And wait. And when that happens, you almost always hear this keyword like viral growth or network effect. So I'm gonna spend some time here on the slides and talk about this. So the word network effect is actually very commonly misused. So as an investor, we actually hear founders claim this all the time, like we have a product that with a network effect, and then we'll say, oh, okay, how does the network effect works? And they'll say, well, we have a great product, and people will like it, and people will share it, and then more people will use it, and then more people will share it. So that's our network effect, and that's just the opposite of the truth. Like that almost exclusively never works. So in order for you to have network effect, you actually need to see two things in action. The first is the more people join, the more value we're supposed to bring to the entire network. On the right-hand side was the very famous founder of Uber jotting down Uber's network effect on a napkin. Like if you want to claim you have a network effect, it should be as straightforward as and as convincing as this napkin. If you're not sure if you have a network effect, you don't. Like for example, in Uber's case, the network effect starts with when you have more driver, then it's easier for any new user to get a ride. So any new driver brings value to a new rider. And when you have more rider, it is much easier for a driver to get business than just wandering on the street. So any new rider is incrementally more valuable to your existing driver. So that's a very clear concept of how each new user brings value to the network. Another example would be Slack. If only one person uses Slack, then there's zero value in Slack. But when you have an entire company all uses Slack, then you have people communicating with each other, and each new user, when he joins the network, opens up the possibility of communication with the existing user. And that same goes for most social networks and marketplace startup. And that's usually where you see people talking about network effect. And that part is very intuitive. The second part was less talked about, but I think it's actually more important. which is with more people join, you should be able to get more free traffic. A great example would be Zoom. The first time I used Zoom is not because I saw an ad or just browsing the App Store and decided, oh, I'm going to download this Zoom thing. The first time I used Zoom is because someone sent me a Zoom link. And Zoom didn't pay them to do that. It's just in its nature that if you're using Zoom, then obviously someone else is using Zoom. And if you can capture on having one person invite the other, then you get free user. So it sounds very intuitive. Why is that important? So if you think about it, Zoom wasn't the first conference app. Actually, the founder of Zoom come from another conference app. And the biggest one before Zoom was WebEx. It was created by Cisco, very traditional enterprise kind of solution. So if you're a Zoom and you are thinking about a strategy to grow faster than WebEx in a very short span of time, then the first thing you think about is, okay, how about if I make it free, right? Which is what Zoom did. But then the next question is, how do you justify having a free app? Because it's free to the user, but it's not free for you to operate. For every Zoom session, Zoom was charged with cloud computing cost, as well as charges from the carriers for transmitting all these data. So imagine if you're at Zoom and you have 100 million meetings going on, and you don't charge any of them, then you will burn a lot of money. So if you go to a VC and say, hey, I'm going to do this video conference thing, which already exists and have a lot of competitor, and I want to make it free, and I need to burn a lot of money, and I'm asking you to give me money to burn. That's not enough. So the additional thing you have to say is, I think the free marketing strategy will work because when I make it free, there will be a lot more users using it. And those users, because they will invite new users, it's actually much cheaper for me to get those users than if I were to do enterprise sales and then pay a bunch of money for Google or Facebook of listing my product in their search. So in a way, my free users are not only freeloaders, but also our ambassadors that helps us attract more users and grow exponentially. And as a VC, those are the things that might, convince us. Like you're burning money to get more user should not be a systematic, okay, I'm gonna spend a lot of money on Google and get users and they'll just come. But the VC money was supposed to be just a starter to get you started, and you should be able to generate users on your own later on. I'm gonna pause a second in case anyone has questions here. Okay. All right, so to conceptualize this, if you want to argue that your product has a network effect, this is what you need to show, that every new user brings value to existing user, and every existing user helps you attract new user. And if you can demonstrate this loop, then you have a good chance of getting a network effect. And there have been a lot of successful examples of this, both in the consumer part and in the enterprise part. Any questions here? Okay. All right, so in theory, when you have this structure of a new user helping existing user and existing user attracts new user, you should have a network effect. But if you just show these slides or tune it towards whatever your product is to a VC, that is not going to convince them, at least not today. So the only way to know for sure if you have a network effect is to do cohort analysis. And this is the only way you will get serious money from first-year VC. If you say I have a network effect, they will say, show me your cohort analysis. So what it means is you need to collect data of your user from different user group. In this scenario, you collect data from user who signed up 3 months ago versus people who signed up 12 months ago. Right? If you look at people who signed up 12 months ago, like in week 1, there are certain percentage of people that still use the app. And then week 2, and then later it kind of diminishes because people just gradually become less interested, right? That's the users that signed up 12 months ago. That's their journey as your user. And for people who sign up more recently, you'll see that it's more sticky, right? More people tends to stay even after a certain period of time. And this is what you want to show a VC, to say, see, like our product is getting better through time because more people are staying. And especially if you look at the tail part of this yellow line, if you can have that, that would be great because it actually means after a certain point, people actually starts to come back even more. And that's kind of when you have really sticky kind of user base. And actually Netflix's cohort analysis pretty much looks like this yellow line. The longer you stay with Netflix, you basically gonna stay for even longer time. And if I remember correctly, I think about 20% of Netflix user that is paying today pays Netflix 7 years ago. So that's a very impressive achievement. And you definitely want your product to be like that as well. But this cohort analysis is not just for you to come up with a graph to show a VC. It's actually for your own reference as well. So not only can you track people that sign up on different time, you can also track people like with different demographics. For example, you can split your user into female and male. And if you see that, oh, why does female use our product that much more than male, then you should go back and examine your product to see, wait, was it because of the color? Was it because it was not straightforward? What was it that makes male don't want to use it? And then you need to make a decision whether or not you should attend to it. So this is not the end. This is more of a thinking framework that you do like over and over again. And yeah, you can do this for different versions of the product. For example, if you have a new product release and you see that, oh, our engagement number goes up, then this is a good product release. Or you can do A/B testing. Like this is probably what you guys know as A/B testing, where you show, say, half of your user this new function, but half of user the current version, and to see if, say, maybe you enlarge the font of the share button, does that make people want to share more? Or if you make the share button like red or pink, does that make people want to share more? And this is how you know it for sure. Yeah, so not only can you track people's experience, you can track all kinds of KPI that you care about. Like if you're at Zoom, then you would definitely care about not only do they attend one meeting, but how many meetings they're attending, how many meetings they are sending out to invite other people, right? And you can even track, for example, do people send invites from Zoom, or do they just generate the link and still share the invites from Google Calendar, right? Like those are all the things that you can track and compare. And these data was supposed to empower your decision of what the product should look like and could look like. And the same thing, you can track for the amount of dollars spent per purchase. So one of the companies we invested is called Grub Market. So they deliver food ingredients to restaurants. So it's like a B2B version of Uber Eats. And how they do growth in part is by adding more category. They started by delivering vegetable, and then they start to deliver meats and dairy, and then they start to deliver seafood. So if it's very healthy, then you're supposed to see that when you add a new category, people actually starts to use it and they form a habit of using it. So think about if you are the growth manager for Grub Market, what kind of KPIs would you want to track, and how would you implement changes to so that your user actually uses those functions? So network effect is great. It's magical, and people love network effect. People love to have network effect. But if you look at the very early stage of the most viral companies, it all comes with a lot of manual bootstrapping. There's a saying, you have to do things that don't scale first in order to scale. So how many of you have heard of the Pinterest story with Apple Store? Anyone? Okay. So at the very early stage, Pinterest don't have a lot of marketing budget. So what they do is the founders literally go to each Apple Store and change the homepage of the displayed computers to Pinterest, like every day. And that worked for like a few weeks before they got kicked out. But yeah, just a demonstration of the dedication and the effort, the length you need to take for you to get the first batch of people going, before you can say, oh, this thing is gonna grow itself, which actually you don't anyway. And the second example is with Airbnb. So when Airbnb first started, like after they pivoted to this short-term rental, they actually don't have good growth. And they don't know why. Like most of their user, like when Airbnb was going through Y Combinator, most of their user and most of their houses is in New York, but the founder, everyone was in the Bay Area. So Paul Graham, the founder of Y Combinator and their investor, actually told them to just get out of their house and go to New York to actually understand their user, because they can't get anything done here. So they get to New York and literally knock on the doors of their hosts and ask them, okay, how are you using Airbnb? Like, what's bothering you? And they realize that the biggest thing bothering them is they don't have photography equipment. They can't make their house looks appealing on the internet. So the few founders actually shoot the photos for these hosts so that it looks better on the internet. And later on, Airbnb actually provides photo shooting services for those hosts. So if we go back to, if you go back to this, theoretically, like every new user should be valuable to our existing hosts, right? And the more hosts there is, it was supposed to attract new users because there are more available housing. But the problem is, does it really attract, right? If you have very shitty photos of a house on the internet, does it really attract user to want to book a stay there? No, it doesn't. So Airbnb actually intervenes on this part to manually make it more attractive in the early stage, so that whatever the existing user has is an asset, not a liability. to the new user. So this part is very manual. And if you are building a startup or a project very early on, a lot of these are manual things you need to do. And the same with Alibaba. So that's basically the Chinese version of Amazon and eBay. And currently, I think it's almost a $1 trillion company. But very early on, when it was the 2000, like 1999, 2000-ish, when they first started, they had a bunch of a skeptical seller that listed on their website, but nobody's buying anything. And Jack Ma, the founder, actually purchased a bunch of stuff himself and just hoarded it in the office so that the website looks like there are people buying stuff and gives confidence to the seller. And that's out of his own pocket, but things are cheaper back then. So I guess it's okay. But yeah, the strategy actually worked. Sellers become more confident. They start to sell more stuff, and that become more attractive to any new user. But that's still very much manual on the very early stage. So to quote himself, today will be hard, tomorrow will be harder, but the day after tomorrow will be great. And another interesting example would be Instagram or Facebook. So most of you know the business of Facebook is to sell advertisement to other companies, right? You pay Facebook to place your content on their ads. But when Facebook enters into a new region, for example, when Facebook was first entering into Japan or Southeast Asia, it actually pays Google a lot of money to acquire the first batch of user. So before, like Facebook has a network effect, but when it gets to a new region, it has no user. So because they have a lot of money, they can splurge some to just pay to get new user, to get them started on the network effect. And that's a valid strategy. So another form of free growth is really just SEO or search engine optimization. Some of you may think it's a very old concept, but it's still very much relevant to specific scenarios. Like as a student or a young founder, many of them started their journey by creating contents. For example, writing about a problem on LinkedIn or Product Hub or Medium, and that attracts a lot of traffic, validates the idea, and then they executed it into a real product. So say you are capable of creating a tons of unique content like reviews or articles. It's actually definitely possible for you to end up with millions of page views that can translate into maybe thousands of users or followers on your mailing list. And you should definitely not ignore the free traffic there because again, those are your core users that you otherwise has to get through the bootstrapping, as I mentioned before. So if you can, definitely take advantage of it. Personally, I wrote a lot of content on Quora as well as the Chinese equivalent of it, Zhihu. And I have tracked that probably attracted a few million people to visit. And that helps me validate a lot of my ideas as well. So if you can do it, definitely encourage you to do that. So that's pretty much about the free growth. I want to pause here to see if anyone has anything to add or raise.
I think there's a question about in the chat about what is the way that new users can bring value to existing users? I think you've talked about it, but can you just elaborate on that a little bit more?
Sure. I think you're talking about this one, right?
Yeah. I think
Right. Right. So if you think about a marketplace, right? If you think of a marketplace, say eBay today, you have a bunch of buyer and you have a bunch of seller. All of these are your existing users, right? And say you have a new user that just signed up and he starts to browse through eBay and made a purchase, then that new user is valuable to your existing user base, right? And the vice versa. When you have more seller on eBay, then eBay as a whole has more SKU. You have more product to sell. Then it becomes more valuable to your existing user. For example, let's say if I were go to eBay and I want to buy like a secondhand MacBook and I couldn't find it, then you lost me as a customer. But if there were, say, a new seller that says, oh, I want to sell my computer, and then I made the purchase, then that new seller brings the value to the network. But this is like the most basic and intuitive version. You don't really see that anymore, especially for if you guys were to do a startup today. So you actually need to design like how your new users can bring value to the existing ones. And this is very much case by case. If you guys can tell me what you guys are working on, then it will be much easier for me to give specific comments on that. Okay. All right. So I talked about free growth, which is the exciting parts and the parts you heard. And I'm also going to talk about paid growth. And I think it's very important because I think paid growth is somehow demonized. Like, oh, you're a startup and you pay money for advertisement, then you must suck, right? But that's actually not true at all. Right. So this is a consensus among investors in the Silicon Valley. Like 30% of all the money that we put into startups ends up in the pockets of Google and Facebook. So we invest in them and then they use the money to buy advertisement to get more user. And actually, this strategy informed on a group of public market investor to say, oh, all of your money ends up with Facebook, then why am I investing in startup instead of Facebook? Which is a valid stock buying strategy to a certain point. Okay, they're very expensive today. But the point is, startups do pay for advertisement, and it's definitely a valid strategy. Some have network effect and pays advertisement, and some relies almost exclusively on advertisement, but still they are a good business. For example, let's say if you are a travel app, right? People don't book travel on a daily basis. But if I were to say, I'm in San Francisco and I want to make a trip to Paris, well, the first thing I do is to Google like trip to Paris guide or tips, right? So all of your user will innately go through those traffic platform like Google or Facebook, and that's where it should be. The second example is fintech. Like most fintech startup, actually almost exclusively, all fintech startups relies heavily on paid advertisement because people don't really talk about fintech on social media, and people don't share about that. People acquire information very much one way from the internet and try to make a decision. and most of them will just pay to get new user. And the same goes for buying a house. So the rule of thumb is if it makes sense for you to pay for ads, you should definitely do it. There's definitely nothing wrong with it as long as it makes sense. So what does it mean to make sense to pay for an advertisement? And this is what you will come across, the term LTV and CAC and the magic number 3. So what LTV means is a user's lifetime value. So it's basically how much you assume an average user will spend on your platform before he become bored and not use it again. And CAC is the cost of acquiring that customer, which is very straightforward. Let's say you spend $100 on Google, and Google show, say, your website to 100,000 people. And of those 100,000 people, one signed up and become a user. Then your CAC is $100 per user. If you pause for a second, you may think, wait, that is very expensive. I'm paying $100 for a user. But imagine if you are Redfin, which is an agent for selling properties like houses or apartments. Then each user will bring you $5,000 or even more. So you spend $100 to get to 100,000 people to watch it. One become a user, but he pays you $5,000. Then your LTV over CAC is 50, which is more than amazing, like great. And the magic number is 3. So if you had a business and you're raising venture capital money, and then they'll definitely ask you, what is your CAC and what is your LTV? And if you can demonstrate that the ratio is 3, then that means you're generally okay. There's just a rule of thumb that 3 is the number you should shoot for. However, that's not the end of the game. It's actually just the beginning. If you have 3 today, that's not guarantee you have 3 tomorrow. Because CAC, customer acquisition cost, is always getting more expensive. Think about it. If you have an app that you want to market to the world, say you have a fashion app or you have a dating app, right? And you start to pay Google for advertisement, you are bidding for AdWords for dating, interesting night out, social connection among, say, male and female between 18 and 22. Then you would end up with a group of people that is most socially active to try out your product. But at some point, you will run out of such demographics, right? There is only a finite amount of young people. So what happened after that? You'll need to start to advertising for people in different age groups. You will start to advertise people in different country and different regions and different backgrounds. And they will not provide as efficient as of user acquisition than your core demographic, because you almost always get your core demographic first. So CAC will always go up. At the same time, your LTV will always go down if you don't change for the same reason. At the first time, you get your core user and then you got a marginal user. So if your LTV is going down and CAC is going up, then that's a very dangerous situation. When you have like a cross, then you are pretty much doomed. So what companies do, what good companies do, is they constantly redesign their product for product market fit for a broader audience. For example, today I have a dating app that fits young people. But when I run out of that, I will need to redesign it so that people, say in their 30s or 40s, will want to use it. perhaps by making some version of it looks more pro, perhaps with certain color change, with certain font change. And those are things that I don't know, and it's not really come out of thin air. You get those decisions by doing cohort analysis, by doing this. You do that repeatedly and adapt your products towards a broader audience. And lastly, for enterprise companies, like for example, Slack, even companies like Slack, almost all relies on sales rep. If you are to consider building a product that will eventually be used in the workspace, it is inevitable that you'll one day hire a sales rep. That's just very normal. And there's a whole systematic way of how you hire sales rep, how you hire your first head of sales. I don't think we have time to cover for that. I think for now, all I wanted to say is that's a very normal part of your growth. Just don't be scared of it. When you get to it, you will just get to it. Okay, so that pretty much wrap up all of the user acquisition. I want to pause here to see if there's any questions. Okay, so are we done with user acquisition? Like if you are a founder and you see a bunch of people signing up to your app or to your website, can you start to pop the champagne now? The answer is no, because when you have the user, you still need to engage them and retain them. And as a matter of fact, engagement is more important today, I would argue, than user acquisition for very specific reasons. So if you think about it, when you get people to sign up on your platform, that's great. They take a look at your platform and then they leave. That means they didn't leave any value to you. But there are ways that you can do to make sure that they engage with your platform constantly. And those are by design. And because we are already in the world with Facebook, with Google, there isn't a lot of opportunities out there that can give you a billion new user, because those are already out there. But just because you don't get to have a platform for a billion user doesn't mean there's no chance for you to build $1 billion startup. And one of those examples is OfferUp. What they do is pretty much like eBay. It's a platform for selling secondhand product. The difference, what's impressive of OfferUp is that within 1 year of inception, it raised almost $100 million US and got almost 30 million users. If you're a VC and you look at OfferUp, like traditionally, you might think like, okay, eBay is already out there. Then why do we need someone that does pretty much the same job? Like eBay has done pretty well in user acquisition already. And you need to go through the same trajectory. And the answer is engagement. So if you look at how much time people spend on OfferUp, it's almost on par with Instagram and Snapchat. For eBay, that number will be single digit. So by result, people are on OfferUp a lot more than they're on eBay. It's something that sticks. So if you look at actual user behavior, people actually just squat on OfferUp, just constantly browsing through new things that they can buy, like a scavenger hunt. But why is that? is because if any one of you have used eBay or Craigslist, you'd realize it has a huge problem with trust and communication. And that's where OfferUp fine-tuned a few of the functions and make sure like it's very easy and safe for any new buyers to contact the seller on mobile and instantly. So if you go back to, where is it? So if you go back to, right. So if you go back to this model for eBay, it was supposed to be any new buyer or any new seller will bring value to the existing user group, and these people will attract new users. But say you are a new user, you just signed up on eBay, and you had your eyes on a MacBook, but you're not sure if you should buy it, and you want to ask the seller how they got it, do they have the receipt, what's the condition, can they shoot a video? You contact them and got no response. What do? Right? You leave, you become inactive. So even though eBay acquired you as a user, they didn't engage you as a user. So OfferUp kind of made changes on this part so that their network effect is more sticky, which ends up in great engagement number. And by the way, from an investor point of view, when you have 30 million user and you raise 100 million US dollar, that's very expensive. Like for other companies, when they have 30 million user, their valuation is not this high. But what impressed the investors that actually invest in them is their engagement number. So in a way, their 30 million user is more valuable than an app with 30 million user, but not active. And especially because nowadays, you already have Facebook out there, you already have these behemoth tech giants that have pretty much occupied your front page of your phone. When you do something, if you're a new app, you are not only competing with your competitor, right? You're competing with everyone else for FaceTime, for screen space, and for like your overall time. And when you have good engagement, people will pay special consideration to it from an investor point of view. Okay. Right. So that's the first part about the methodology. I want to pause here in case anyone has any questions.
Yeah, there is a question asking, what is the best way to get business to use a platform, such as restaurants using Postmates?
That's a great question. So, so if you're selling to business, let me give you an example. So the company that we work for, so the company that I'm with today, what they do is high performance computing, and their customer is pretty much the industry leader in automobile, aerospace, semiconductor, and life science. Like we can literally fit all of our potential customers' name on Excel sheet. Like I can list all of them. There's like a few thousand names because all smaller companies is not really going to use us. And when that's the case, it doesn't make sense for me to, pay Google to show our name and hoping someone from those company will see it and talk to their bosses, and they will talk to their bosses and reach out to us. It doesn't make sense, right? When you can literally just find all the decision maker on LinkedIn and cold mail them. And that's actually part of what we do. It's literally just to find people and talk to them and see a conversion rate The conversion rate might not be high, maybe it's 1%, maybe it's 2%, but it's where you start. And it's also a good indicator because for every new product, there's an adoption curve. Like not everyone will start to use your product from day one. There are people that are innovators and risk takers, wants to use new products to get an edge on competition. And those are the ones that will respond to you early on. And for those of you that didn't respond, that's actually good for you so that you don't waste time on them who are not ready today to become your customer, but they might be ready when you become bigger or have a successful case studies from the companies that the customers that you did engage with that are innovators and try you first. So yeah, it's kind of a natural filter for us. So we are on, say, the extreme side of the spectrum where we know who our customer is very well. On the other hand, say if you're selling to a restaurant, for example, like as the Guam market, which I mentioned before, then its behavior is a lot like consumer. There really isn't like one or two ways to say, oh, for restaurant you do this, for hospital you do that. It's very much per scenario. But the basic principle is still like you need to understand first what problem you're solving, and currently where do your customer go to find solution for that product. And actually on that, I want to go back to the concept of SEO and creating content. Before there's Medium or LinkedIn, if you have a blog, you actually need to build your own blog site with WordPress or anything, and you need to do the SEO yourself and hoping people, hoping Google will rank your content up there. But that actually is not a problem anymore. Like today, if you write on Medium and your content is good, Google will almost always show it first. So that's, you can call it a hack, but that's definitely a value that you can capture into, because for a lot of those restaurants or small business, when they go find solutions, they do go to Google. And if you want to build a product to address those markets, the cheapest way for you to test that idea is to write about it and see how people respond to it. That's actually the cheapest way. But surprisingly, not a lot of people is doing it. But I highly recommend it. On Medium, on LinkedIn, on Pinterest, on Yelp, wherever your customer is, write something with very specific insights, and you will definitely get free traffic. And that's definitely a lot cheaper than you actually building a product and try to sell it. Sorry, does that answer your question?
Yeah, thank you.
Hi,
Right.
I have another question. So,
Yep, go ahead.
sorry, this is going back to the LTV and the CAC, but why might we calculate our LTV over a shorter period of time of like 90 or 180 days instead of 1 year? And how should the quality and the volume of our monetization data impact our calculation period?
That's a good question. Well, the short answer is you should track LTV as long as possible. But for most companies, especially on the early days, you don't have that data. Like if you're only if you're only operating for a year, then the longest you have is 12 months, right? And also for most companies, like most of their user will decay within the first week or so, like you probably only left with 10%-ish user after like a month or two. Like if you do have data after 2 months, that's already a great indication that you're doing something good.
Okay, thank you.
All right. So that's pretty much everything on growth as a methodology. To be clear, this is a tip of the iceberg. Like there's a lot of content out there, a lot of great stories and specific stories on how these companies managed to grow out of thin air or with money. And if you were to do a startup and thinking about growth, you should definitely refer to those stories and see how they can apply to you. What I've covered so far is really just a framework and like a short executive summary. All right. So the second part I wanted to really cover is really growth as a team, what the growth team look like. Intuitively, let's say you're a startup and you've heard the idea of growth, then your first intuitive idea is, okay, I'm gonna hire a growth hacker and he's going to figure everything out. That might be the case like 10 years ago, but now growth is a teamwork. And for most of the missions within growth, you actually need different functional roles. You need a growth product manager, you need growth engineers, you need growth marketer, you need growth data, you need a growth designer. For example, like how would a growth designer be different from an actual designer? Well, then the emphasis is really on speed, right? If you're a growth designer, then you will be tasked with generating a lot of versions of the design very fast. Instead of if you are, say, working on the main product, then you might be fine-tuning a different pixel to make it quote unquote perfect. So that would be the difference. And what would the growth PM be different than the actual PM? So if you think about it, you can think about it as the actual PM has a goal of deliver core value of the product, right? So if you're the PM for Uber, then your role is to design the app so that it works. It responds very fast. There are no bugs, and people can get rides right. Can, like for example, before Uber, all the little cars on Uber doesn't have face direction, and then it has face direction so that people can see if they're on the right side of the road. Like those are your work. But for the growth PM, it has some discretion over the product, but not the entire discretion. It might have discretion on things like within the app, there is share it and get $10 off. And those functions will be yours. You need to design the incentives of how changing certain things can help your app grow. So the sole focus for a growth PM is to get new user. The sole focus for a normal PM is to deliver core value. And obviously they need to work together through different functions. And for different companies, they would have a different team structure to support that. Like for example, many companies uses this cross-functional team structure where you have growth PM reporting to the product engineering, still under engineering team, but you have a layer like a specialty task force of these people that delivers on the growth goal. And you also have organizations that have an independent team structure where you have a VP of growth leading the entire growth team, and they have much more say in what the product would look like. They can iterate much faster. And this is what Facebook has. This is what Uber has at the very beginning. there really isn't right or wrong. And I think for most of you today that are trying to do a project, this would only happen much later on. But if you're looking for a career in growth, then you can think about if these roles fits your personality, and if you want to give it a try. So that's all of my presentation. And lastly, I want to leave with you an exercise. So we talked about a lot of principles today on how to grow, and that's mostly on the user side. And I think most of you can see how these strategies would work if you are a Uber growth manager that focuses on getting more rider. I want you to try to think about what would you do if you are a Uber growth manager that focuses on getting more driver? How can you apply these principles? And with that, I want to thank Thomas for inviting me, and thanks all of you for being here. You can reach me on my email if you have any questions. I'm always happy to help the fellow columns.
Awesome. Here there are a few questions I got. One is, how do you know when it is time to introduce new growth strategies? And what is considered too ambitious in the initial stage?
Great question. So how do you know? So I guess I should cover this. So growth is really a mindset. It's not a thing. It's really you put everything in the perspective of data. So when you ask how to make a decision, you always go back to cohort analysis. How do you know if you should implement a growth strategy? Well, you should when your existing growth strategy doesn't work, right? So if you did an experiment and see that, oh, my paid ads didn't pay off, or I'm trying to market to certain demographics, but they're not responding, or if they sign up, but they actually don't use it at all, then you know you have to change. Like this is all data-driven, is not rule-based. It's not I read a book, I go by the textbook. No, it's all see from data and iterate and make those decisions. And I'm sorry, I think there's a part 2 of the question.
I mean, the second part of this question is what is considered too ambitious in the initial stage?
Well,
I guess the person is asking about like what type of growth strategy is too ambitious for early startup.
I can't really think of anything that is too aggressive unless you are spending a lot of money, right? The only thing I can think of is if you are going to, if you're going to pay a lot of money on advertisement at early stage, which is not necessarily wrong. Like there are successful companies that starts to pay Google or Facebook at day one. Like fintech or travel. That happens. It's not necessarily wrong, but you need to, again, keep close track of your data and start small for sure, like work with whatever money you have. And again, if you're gonna burn through a certain period of time, like for example, your LTV is 0 at the very beginning because you don't really sell anything, then you need to plan for financing, which I'm sure you will cover later on. But general gist is you should leave about 12 to 18 months of survival, assuming that you're burning at certain rate, either because you're paying for advertisement or because you're paying your employee. But you should think about your runway. Like if you have no new income, how long can you survive?
Great. And then there's another question asking on your advice to current students at Berkeley, specifically what they should be doing to, I guess, to advance their professional development or things in that nature.
That's a very general question. Okay, how about this? I can talk about what might be helpful to do if you intend to be around startup or do startup at one point in time. What can you do now? And translating that to another question would be, what do I wish I know when I was in Berkeley, or what do I wish I'd have done? I think the first thing is really to get as much information as you can. There is a lot of content out there, both this class and beyond this class, that talks about how to do a startup, what are ways to bootstrap from zero, even if you're not a technical founder. Like there are free tools or very cheap tools for you to put together a project that would take a Steve Jobs or his peers $100,000 to do 10, 20 years ago. And that is definitely a gift that we should really tap into. For example, there are tools like Wix that you can use to set up a website instead of writing the HTML code yourself. There's MailChimp for you to engage with your subscriber and to constantly pushing for notification, which had it not be there, you will have to write just very, very difficult codes or put together a long list of Google form. And if you have done it before, you know how hard it is to manage. And there is a PayPal, there's Stripe, all the things that exist to empower you as a founder happens very recently. It didn't exist before. So if anything, today is the best day to try a project, and tomorrow will be a better day. And it definitely, I definitely encourage all of you to try do some project and do it the right way. Like do it the scientific way, do it the proven way. Start small, but make each steps right. Like you've learned all about designing a product, find product market fit, do growth, and all the different steps within a startup life cycle. Try to follow them and see how well you fit into it. It will give you two information: one, whether or not you are ready to do a startup, or whether or not you like the startup idea, and two, aware about your personality that you can still improve on to become a better founder in the future. And those are very valuable in of itself, even if your project is naive at the very beginning.
Awesome.
And also, like we've seen, oh, sorry.
Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead.
Right. So also, like things do happen when you do a startup and become really, really great. Like for example, Brax was done by a bunch of Stanford students. Before Brax, they haven't really had much success. They literally start with nothing. They're in college, and now they're I think 23, 24, but already running $1 billion company. So it is definitely possible. And yeah, if you had a chance for that, you should definitely give it a try.
There's another question I see here is asking, the person is asking, how do college students break into VC, especially when they don't have any capital?
Well, I guess before that, the real question is, why do you want to break into VC? So I know like VC is like a very shiny title. It definitely has its perks, which is you get to meet with founders and see new technology and meet very interesting people. But at the same time, it is a profession. Like VC is a profession the same way dentist is a profession and teacher is a profession. And you need to respect it. There's a lot of professional skills that involved, but also if you just think about it from a founder perspective, what do you bring to the table? So most VC is a partnership, which means the entirety of the organization is the organization itself. Like the partners of the VC fund defines what the VC fund is. And if you want to break into VC and hope at some day you will become a partner, then what you need to ask is, what do you bring on the table? So there are 4 parts of VC, 4 parts of what VC would do, which is to raise money from institutional investors like pension funds, and to make a judgment of investing, where to invest those money. And third is to monitor the development of the projects you invested in and help those projects, right? And fourth is to seek how to exit those projects and get financial return either through M&A or through an IPO. Traditionally, VC is all about making good judgments. Like you find a good startup and you invest in it, that makes you a great VC. But nowadays, it's more emphasized on the third part, which is how you can help your startup. Because there has been a lot more VCs out there today, and it's really a two-way street now. Like good startup founders gets to choose which VC he wants to work with. And if you want to break into VC, then you need to think about, okay, how my skill sets can help a founder today or in the future. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, that's the last
Hello?
question I see from my end. Well, I think he's stuck. His internet. Let's see. Well, anyways, I hope that was helpful to the people that are still here. And with that, I want to say thank you for Chef. Thank you to Chef for coming. And this is the end of our class today.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Awesome.